Let's talk about the anterior pituitary in relation to hypothalamus in much more detail. So let's get on with it. So the anterior pituitary is the lobe of the pituitary gland which synthesizes its own hormones. So if we were to look at the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland in the brain of a human being, and if we enlarge the gland, we will see that it has certain sections to it. Now these sections being first the hypothalamus. Now this is the hypothalamic area with its neurons. Now these are the neurons with its cell bodies, with its axons. This is the optic chiasm, this is the third ventricle, and this is the median eminence of the hypothalamus. Next, we have the infundibulum. Infundibulum or the hypophyseal stalk or the pituitary stalk. There are many names for it, but this is the area which is known as the infundibulum. Now, this infundibulum contains both the pouching of the anterior pituitary or the anterior lobe of the pituitary gland and contains both the extension towards the hypothalamus of the posterior gland. But for this section, we will only limit ourselves to the anterior pituitary. As for the anterior pituitary, only the tuber lobe of the anterior pituitary is found at this area. Next, we have the pituitary gland. Now, pituitary gland again is shaped like a pouch because it lies in a depression which again is shaped like this. Now, the important part is the vascularity of this area and the resulting plexus. Now, what are these is that this is the superior hypophyseal artery. The superior hypophyseal artery supplies the infundibulum and the median eminence of the hypothalamus, and at that area it forms the primary plexus of the vascular bed. Now, from this primary plexus of the vascular arterial bed, we have certain arterioles which then move towards the anterior pituitary. Now these are termed as the hypophyseal portal veins. Now these portal veins again contain the oxygenated blood. Why? Because this plexus is of arterial origin, and when this plexus give rise to the secondary plexus which is found around the anterior lobe of the pituitary, it turns from artery to the vein, and it still contains the oxygenated blood. So because it contains the oxygenated blood, this is termed as a portal system. So this portal system is known as the hypophyseal portal system, and this vein is known as the hypophyseal portal vein. In our body, there are only two portal systems. The one portal system is the one that lies with the liver, and the second portal system is the one that lies in the pituitary gland. So you must not forget that both of these portal systems have one thing in common, that both of these, even though they contain the venous system, they contain the oxygenated blood, and they are extension of the arterioles or the plexus of the arterioles that comes before them. So this is the anterior pituitary, and this is the secondary capillary plexus of the hypophyseal portal system, and this is the hypophyseal vein. Now, as you can easily see that from the superior hypophyseal artery, we have first the influx of the blood towards the stalk where it forms a vascular bed known as the primary vascular bed or the primary plexus. Now this is the posterior pituitary and this is the primary plexus of the hypophyseal portal system. Now from this primary we have certain tributaries that then move towards the anterior pituitary, form a vascular bed around whole of the pituitary gland and then contribute towards a single vein known as the hypophyseal vein. Now both of these plexuses are important because this one supplies the infundibulum and the major part of the infundibulum is the one that is composed of the axonal areas of the nuclei that are part of the hypothalamus, forming the hormones which then are transported towards the posterior lobe. Now as for the anterior lobe, this plexus is important because this supplies the tuberal lobe of the anterior pituitary. Now then when it moves towards the anterior pituitary, it forms a venous bed, and this venous bed is of special importance. Why? Because this venous bed has certain fenestrations to it. Fenestrations meaning that it has large holes or a sieve-like structure to them, and because of these sinusoids, the transfer of the hormones synthesized by the anterior lobe of the pituitary and between the sinusoids, which contains large hole, can take place easily. There's no need for any gradient, there's no need for any receptor system to take place or any kind of a secondary messenger system. The whole transfer of the hormones which are synthesized by the tissue of the anterior lobe of the pituitary is transferred to the venous plexus. The secondary plexus of the hypophyseal portal system happens directly, and from there it moves into the hypophyseal vein, and from the hypophyseal vein it is then transported and distributed towards the whole of the body. So in order to simplify, the blood moves in towards the superior hypophyseal artery, form the primary arterial plexus, then it moves tributary, forms the secondary venous bed or the secondary venous plexus, and this venous plexus has sinusoids or large holes in them or fenestrations, and because of these fenestrations all the cells which synthesize all of these important hormones of the anterior pituitary can move inside the veins, and from there the blood carries them towards this hypophyseal vein and then into the central circulation. Now if there was no fenestrations as this area, either there must have been a gradient or some kind of a receptor system, but we do not have that here. Because of the sinusoids, the transfer of the hormones from the anterior pituitary tissue can easily take place towards the blood and ultimately towards the whole of the body. Now, these are the neurosecretory cells. Now, these neurosecretory cells do not have a direct impact on the anterior lobe of the pituitary gland or the anterior pituitary. Why? Because they only have an effect that is indirect. They release certain factors, certain either releasing factors or inhibitory factors, which then uh, com- uh, comply to the anterior part of the pituitary gland, and these releasing or inhibiting factors then result in either the increased production of the said hormone or the decreased production. So as for the anterior pituitary, these neurosecretory cells of the hypothalamus do not have a direct effect. They have an indirect effect through the inhibitory and releasing factors. So this comprises what is known as the hypothalamus releasing hormones. Now, again, I will repeat that these hormones are not the actual hormones released by the anterior pituitary. These are the inhibitory and the releasing hormones which are released by the hypothalamus, and under the influence of these releasing and inhibitory hormones, the anterior pituitary then either increases or decreases the production of those hormones. So because of the hypothalamus releasing such inhibitory or releasing factors, what we have is hypothalamus which then gets stimulated to produce either those hormones or gets inhibited to decrease the production of those hormones. And whenever those hormones are produced, they are again released through the hypophyseal vein and through the hypophyseal vein into the whole of the human body, through the venous system and then to the arterial system. So hypothalamus has a indirect influence on the anterior pituitary by affecting the release of both the releasing factors and inhibitory factors, and then these factors further influence the anterior pituitary into either increasing the production or decreasing the production, and then those hormones which are then released, they are released collectively through the hypophyseal vein. Next, we're going to talk about the cellular structure of the anterior pituitary. Now, the cellular structure of anterior pituitary is very straightforward, because we know that both the anterior pituitary and the posterior pituitary have very different cellular structure. Anterior produces its own hormones while the posterior pituitary only stores those hormones. So the anterior pituitary has 5 types of cells, each type of cell producing a certain kind of hormone, while it also contains certain sinusoids, and these sinusoids are then responsible for the direct transfer of the released hormones into the vascular system. Now, we also know because they um, release and produce their own hormones, the anterior pituitary or the adenohypophysis is actually produced embryologically through what is known as the Rathke's pouch. And Rathke's pouch is basically a pouch which is formed by the invagination of the epithelium of the pharyngeal area. So the pharyngeal area, epithelium of that area, when it forms an invagination during the embryological stages, it forms what is known as the anterior lobe of the pituitary gland. And it is because of this invagination of the pharyngeal epithelium that we get epithelium like cells in the anterior pituitary. Now, this is a slide of the cells of the anterior pituitary. Now, here you will see that there are 5 kind of cells producing different hormones, where one cell only produces one type of hormone, while we'll also notice what are the sinusoids and how they are seen on light microscopy, and when those tissues are stained and viewed under such. First of all, we have the gamma cells, then we have the sinusoids. Now these sinusoids are basically holes or fenestrations in the vascular system or the vascular bed of the anterior pituitary. Then we have the alpha cells being the somatotropes. Then we have the epsilon acidophile cells, we have the beta basophile cells, we have the simple beta cells. Now, the alpha cells, which are somatotropes or which release the growth hormones, form about 30 to 40% of whole of the cellular structure of the anterior pituitary, while the thyroid forming cell, which is the uh, beta cell, forms around 30% of the cellular composition of the anterior pituitary, whilst rest of the cells are only composed of around 3 to 5%, and even though their concentration might be low, they produce very powerful hormones, like for example prolactin. Even though it is released in very low amount, and the amount of the cells present in the anterior pituitary producing prolactin is very low, prolactin in itself is a very powerful peptide, affecting not only the memory system or the breast, but also the expression and the production of milk. Next, we'll talk about the cells of the anterior pituitary and how they are named. Now, there are five differentiated cell types which are found in the anterior lobe of the pituitary. Now, these are the somatotropes, being the most common type, and somatotropes are the one which release the growth hormone. Then we have the adrenotropes. Now, adrenotropes are the one which release the adrenocortic adrenotropic hormone. Now, adrenocorticotropic hormone is the one which affects the adrenal gland of our body, or to be more precise, it affects the cortex of the adrenal gland or the suprarenal gland of our body. Then we have the thyrotropes. Now, thyrotropes are the cells which produce the thyroid stimulating hormone. Now, thyroid stimulating hormone is a hormone which controls the thyroid, the gland which is found anterior to the neck. Now, the function of both TSH among all of these will be discussed further on. Then we have the gonadotropes. Gonadotropes are the one which release two types of hormones. One is the follicle stimulating hormone, while other is the luteinizing hormone. Now both of these are released in both males and females, and both have to do with the reproductive system. Last but not least, we have the lactotropes, and lactotropes are the one which produce the prolactin, and these are usually found more in females in relation, because they are the one which express the milk. Then we have the anterior pituitary hormones. Now, the anterior pituitary hormones are of six types. There are six peptides, and these six peptides are further divided into three, which are only peptides, that they are basically simple chains of amino acids, and three of these are actually glycoproteins, that they have some small amount of sugar associated with them. And these glycoproteins also have, instead of having a single peptide chain, multiple chains, that they have both the alpha unit and the beta subunit. So I will mention which hormone is a simple peptide and which hormone is a glycoprotein. Now we have the TSH, ACTH, FSH, LH, growth hormone, prolactin, and endorphin. Now let's start with the TSH, or the thyroid stimulating hormone. Now, thyroid stimulating hormone is a glycoprotein. So it is a protein which has two subunits, the alpha and the beta genes, along with a little amount of sugar with them. Now, the function of TSH is to affect the both structure and the function of the thyroid gland. Now, the thyroid gland is found anterior to the trachea. It is found anterior to the neck, and when it increases in size, which is known as squatter, it is very easily seen. You can also easily see it when swallowing it. You can easily see it whenever somebody swallows a liquid because it moves according to the um, trachea. Now, TSH in thyroid affects both the rate of the formation of thyroxine and triiodothyronine, that is the T3 and T4. It controls the formation of both of these hormones. It also controls the amount of the follicular cells which are found inside the thyroid gland, because it is these follicular cells which contains the thyroglobin, which is then further converted when iodinated, then converted into the T3 and T4, which is commonly known as the thyroxine and triiodothyronine. Next, we have the ACTH, or the adrenocorticotropic hormone. Now, this hormone affects the zona fasciculata and zona reticularis of the cortex of the adrenal gland. Now, adrenal gland is a suprarenal gland. It is found superiorly to the both kidneys, so it is found in pair. And when studying it histologically, it is composed of two parts: the medulla, that is the middle part, and the cortex, that is the outer part. Now, in the cortex, there are three layers. Now, in these three layers, these are the zona glomerularis, uh, zona fascicularis, and the zona reticularis. Now, the ACTH affects only the second and third layer of the cortex of the adrenal gland. It does not have much effect on the first layer, that is the zona glomerulus. Why? Because the first layer produces the mineralocorticoids, while the second and third layer produces the glucocorticoids and androgens. And it is the glucocorticoids and the formation of androgens which is affected by this hormone. Then we have the FSH and LH. FSH being the follicle stimulating hormone and LH being the luteinizing hormone. Now, both of these hormones have to do with the reproductive system. Now, in females, these hormones affect both the maturation of the ovarian follicle. They also affect the formation of the corpus luteum. They also affect the both the rate and control the amount of the ovulation. And in males, they affect the amount and the rate of the spermatogenesis, and they also control the amount of the growth of the both testes. So these two hormones are extremely important both in males and females for the fertility and the optimum growth of the reproductive system. Then we have the GH, or the growth hormone. Now, growth hormone is the hormone which affects almost whole of the body. It affects its growth, it affects the cell division, cell differentiation all over the body. It affects the insulin-like growth factor. It affects the effect of the insulin on cell. It decreases that effect. It increases lipolysis, and it decreases the effect of glycolysis on different cells. So in turn, the growth hormone has major function from the prenatal stage to the postnatal stage, from the childhood, from the adulthood. So any kind of lack of formation of growth hormone can result in variety of clinical conditions. Next is the prolactin. Now, prolactin, as the name says, is the one which controls both the growth and the structure of the breast in females, and it also controls both the production and the expression of the milk after the pregnancy. Last but not least is the endorphin. Now, anterior pituitary does not only contain these three cells and doesn't only have cells which produce only these five main hormones. It also has certain other cells, even though they are present in very low quantity, but they are present. And one of the major one which is produced in larger amounts among those minor hormones produced in the anterior pituitary is the endorphin. Endorphin is the hormone which is usually associated with the perception of pain. So whenever endorphins are released in larger amounts, the perception of the pain is reduced. While if they're reduced in lesser quantities, the perception of the pain increases. So these are the basic hormones which are released by the anterior pituitary or the anterior lobe of the pituitary gland. Now let's talk about the metabolic function of the anterior pituitary hormones. Now anterior pituitary hormones, or which are secreted by the gland. Now, like I said, the first and foremost are the thyrotropin hormones. Now, they directly affect the thyroid gland. Now, thyroid gland is a paired gland which is linked by an isthmus, which you can easily see. This is the pair, while this is the isthmus of the gland, and is found anteriorly to the neck, and it has a direct effect on both its growth and the amount of the thyroxine that may be produced by it, and it does so by affecting the amount of the thyroglobulin that is metabolically produced inside the follicular cells of the thyroid gland. Next, we have the growth hormone. Now, growth hormone has a direct effect on the growth of the human being, that it directly controls both the growth and the rate of the growth, and it also has an indirect effect by affecting the amount of the blood glucose that is present inside the blood. So directly or indirectly it affects the growth and the metabolic function of the cells of almost all of the body. Next, we have the corticotropins or the ACTH. They affect the adrenal cortex. Like I said, they do not affect the adrenal medulla, and even in the cortex, they only affect the zona fasciculata and reticularis, because these are the one which produces the glucocorticoids and the androgens. Androgens being the testosterone and the DHEA. Now, adrenal gland is also known as a gland which produces the cortisol, and cortisol is again known as a stress hormone. So, as a stress hormone, it also has a direct and an indirect effect on the metabolic activity of the cells of the whole body. So, the human beings and its growth is affected not only by the growth factor but also by the cortisol, which is then if released by the effect of the ACTH, which is then released by the corticotropins. Now, whenever there is an increase of the blood glucose. Now, blood glucose increases because cells are dividing and differentiating at an exponential rate. So, the body needs more energy, and the energy is derived from the glucose. So, there is more glucose inside the blood as well as inside the cells. Now, because of this, growth hormone and cortisol both promote the increase in the secretion of the insulin. Why? Because insulin is a peptide which promotes the entry of glucose from the blood to the cells. Now, without the insulin, the glucose only remains in the blood. Now, when it remains only in the blood, that leads to hyperglycemia, and hyperglycemia can have dire consequences, most notably being it can result into diabetes mellitus, and it does all of this by affecting the islets of Langerhans and the beta cells which are found inside the pancreas. Now, next are the follicle stimulating hormone and the luteinizing hormone. Now, both of these affect in a female the ovaries and in males the testes. Now, in both genders, they affect both the rate of the growth and the amount of the growth of the gonads, that is, the testes and the ovaries. In addition, they also control the amount of the ovulation in the females, the amount of the spermatogenesis in the males. They also control the amount of the formation of the corpus luteum after the ovulation in the females, and the amount of the semen production in males after the spermatogenesis has taken place. Lastly is the prolactin. Now, prolactin has a direct effect on the growth of the tissue of the breast, and not only it has an effect on the growth of the size and the shape of the breast, but it also has a direct effect on both the production of the milk and the expression of the milk through the nipple whenever a baby suckles on it.